Morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody on this sparkle morning. Sparkle is the name of a red tea that we're going to do today. Red tea, for those of you who are new to the broadcast, really in the West, we think of it as black tea. Again, as a reminder, the reason that we don't call it black tea at this shop is that the Chinese don't call it black tea. They call it in Chinese, hung cha, and the only proper translation of that is red tea. That all got messed up by the British when they first started taking tea back to China. And the reason this is important is because actually China has a true black tea. Oh, but wait a minute. These days in the literature, sometimes you see a tea referred to as dark tea. This is also not such a good translation. The Chinese term is hei cha, which literally means black tea. But the Chinese decided to start translating it as dark tea, so to avoid the confusion that we have in the West. So what we've done here is we take the true translations of both hung cha and hei cha. So hung cha, which we're having today, red tea, is heavily oxidized. Hei cha, black tea, is fermented. So that's the main difference between the two. So by the end of today, what is it you're going to know more about than you do right now? By the end of today, you're going to know very clearly where this tea comes from. You're going to know age and environment of this tea. And we're going to start off with a discussion about caffeine. So you're going to know more about caffeine and tea. So let's jump right in, because this has been an eventful week at the tea shop. The main event has been a shipment caught up in customs. We don't like that at the tea shop. We like our shipments to come through smoothly. And usually they do. This is shipment of tea, by the way. Usually they do, because we have all the right documentation that we file in China. We have all the right people helping us all along the way to double check that everything is in place. And most importantly, from the US side, we have all the numbers that are necessary to file before you do this. But somehow ours got held up. And part of the reason was that the shipper didn't realize that the appropriate documentation was already in place. They looked on the wrong boxes or in the wrong box. So at any rate, held up, but we think just yesterday was released to go through customs so that we can receive the shipment. And this will be, as far as we can tell, the last shipment of the year that we're going to get. Now, every time I say that, you should check your truth scale, because it seems like whenever I say, oh, we're only going to have X number of teas, oh, this will be the last shipment, oops, another shipment rolls in. This, I should have said, is the last planned shipment for the year. And we're really looking forward to this shipment, because this shipment has a lot of wonderful new teas that we'll figure out how to get on these boards. So let's shift gears for a moment and let's talk about caffeine in tea. One of you brought up a situation where a doctor told you that a certain type of tea had more caffeine than another type of tea, and dutifully went and looked on Google and on the web, because we know that we always get the truth on the web, and discovered that apparently certain types of tea may have more caffeine than other types of tea. So let me make this as clear as I can for everybody, because this is a very confusing topic. It's confusing for everybody except scientists who work in the tea industry. It's not confusing to them. And people who really looked hard at this question. So why is there so much or so many different ideas about which tea has how much caffeine in it? Basically, the issue is there are a lot of factors in determining which tea has more caffeine, which tea has less caffeine. Does it matter that much? Well, for some people, it matters a lot because they have a caffeine sensitivity. But I will remind everybody that we have about 7 billion ways of indicating or indicators in the world. So what do I mean by that? For those of us who are in touch with ourselves, when we consume caffeine, we know how we feel. And so to have an outside agency tell you, so if I say to you, okay, such and such a tea has double the caffeine of another tea, but you drink that such and such a tea and you don't get double the reaction. Well, your reaction, whatever it is the key element. Should inform you better than I inform you, should inform you better than anybody informs you about what your sensitivity or lack thereof to caffeine is. So we've got to remember that first. We're all our own indicators. Why is it so hard to make a categorical statement, a definitive statement, which says XT is always the most caffeinated? So let's look at the elements that go into determining that. And in fact, what I did after I got this comment the other day was to go back and look at the history of determination of caffeine and to look at why there's so much confusion. So let's first look at the elements that go into determining caffeine in a tea, and then let's look at why there's confusion. So the elements that go in are when it's picked. That's one element. That's an important element. Is it a spring pick or is it a fall pick? Which pick has more caffeine? Which pick has less caffeine? The fall pick has less caffeine. The spring pick has more caffeine. Why is that? When new growth occurs, that's when the most caffeine in a plant is. As it goes through the season, there's less caffeine. Let me think about this. Maybe I can apply this principle in another way. What if I'm getting tea picked from trees that are 2,000 plus years old versus plantation tea? Tea that's grown in bushes and every year shoots up those new sprouts. Which logically and actually factually has more caffeine? It would be the plantation tea, the tea that grows in the bushes year after year after year. That has more caffeine than the elder statespeople. The elder trees have less caffeine. And this is just a fact related to age of the plant. So that's another element. Now, some of you are going to ask me, okay, can you get it down? Can you give me real numbers? The answer is no, I cannot, because there's another element at work here. And the other element is varietal. Do you think that every varietal has the same amount of caffeine, catechins, volatiles, Might that be true? The answer is absolutely not. Every single varietal cultivar has different levels of caffeine. Oh my gosh, this is getting complicated. Oh, but there's more. How about the environment where the plant grows? What's the alkalinity, and is that related to caffeine? And the answer is yes. So certain soils have certain compositions. They end up with the same varietal in two different types of soils, producing different amounts of caffeine. So that's another element. Oh, this is getting more complicated by the moment. I wonder if there are any other elements. How about how the farmer treats the tea? This doesn't mean does he play music in the tea fields or out in the forest. That's not how I'm talking about in terms of treating the tea. All the farmers treat the tea real nice. What I'm really talking about is how do they process the tea. So if you have a long drawn out process, now let me think, which style of tea has a long, oolong teas, especially cliff teas. Those are processed over a 6 or 7 month period. Does that have more caffeine or less caffeine? Always less caffeine. Less caffeine compared to what though? Less caffeine to other processing modalities. So let's remind ourselves of what the other modalities are. You've got white teas, lightly oxidized. You got green teas, non-oxidized. You have yellow teas, a little bit heavier oxidation, but not as heavy as the red teas, which you have very heavy oxidation. Oolongs that go from lighter to heavier oxidation. And then you have the dark teas, which are more fermented, especially in the beginning, than oxidized. Yes.
Does the caffeine level, is it also different in a bud versus a mature leaf of the same plant?
Great question. So you're way ahead of me. And this is great. This shows how smart all of you are. A bud, and so the question is, hey, looking at the plant, might it be possible that the bud has more caffeine than the leaves? And the answer is absolutely. The buds have more caffeine. So let me continue along that line for a minute. What about the stems? You know, occasionally in the tea, I see stems in there. Do they have caffeine? Yes, they do have caffeine. What if somebody accidentally put in a branch, a little bit of a branch into the tea? Would that have caffeine? Yes. So there are differing levels depending on what part of the plant. The only part of the plant which doesn't seem to have caffeine is the actual flower itself and the actual seed itself. Every other part of the plant has some degree of caffeine, the bud being where the concentration of the caffeine is. So let's go a little further because now we're on a roll. Wow, there's caffeine everywhere. Very dangerous planet. What if the plant is grown in shade? Because we know in Japan, they on purpose shade some of the plants. Does that produce more or less caffeine? It actually produces more caffeine. Which then leads us to, okay, if it's grown on a mountainside, which gets less sunlight, is it going to be more or less? It's going to be more caffeine. So now you are thoroughly understanding the confusion I have over the question of caffeine. Because when I look at all these elements, oh gosh, every varietal is different. Okay, every processing modality. Hey, maybe there's a simple way to do this. You know what? I like shortcuts. I'm lazy. I'm the understudy. Love shortcuts. Maybe I can just make some categorical statements by modality. Would it be fair for me to say, and more importantly, would it be accurate for me to say that less processed teas probably have more caffeine? Well, it would be logical to a degree, except I told you before that the varietals have different amounts. There is this monumental study. So I'm going to switch gears here. I'm going to tell you why historically this question has been so complicated. At the end, we're going to circle back and I'm going to tell you how to make an evaluation of the caffeine. You're not going to like the answer, but by having the whole circle, you'll appreciate the answer. So historically, when looking at the caffeine issue, scientists from all over the world, they've gone into their laboratories and they've been doing this for a long time and, make their analysis. So let me ask you a couple questions about that. Has the evaluation technique for caffeine changed over the years? Yes, it has. Has the instrumentation gotten better and better, able to measure more accurately? Yes. So any measurements that were taken in the 70s, 80s, and 90s probably are augmented today by better measurements, better machinery. That would be a true statement. So that's part of the issue. The other part of the issue is, okay, I'm a scientist. I'm completing a PhD thesis. I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to get a blended tea, and I'm going to do my experimentation on that. Oh, and where's this blended tea from? I'm going to choose Sri Lanka. Okay, I do my experimentation. Oh, high caffeine. Wow. And then you publish. Okay, this has more caffeine, whatever the style of tea is, than another style. And I'm talking about modality, as a red tea or as a green tea. And then that gets into the press. And all of a sudden, the press makes a generalization. Okay, all black teas have more caffeine than any other style of tea. That's a false statement. It's a patently false statement, but it seemed true at the time because, hey, this researcher did this. We had other researchers. Can I replicate what this researcher did with the Sri Lankan tea? Oh, I can replicate it. This means it's true. Except, what about Indian teas? Didn't I say different varietals have different amounts? Oh, yeah, we got to expand. Okay, let's take some Indian and let's say, hey, and I also said it was a blend. And what about if it's CTC, cut, tear, and crumble? In other words, in a tea packet versus premium loose leaf. Is there a difference there? There is a difference there. So, yes.
Well, you also mentioned weather and it growing on the shady side, and then that makes me think about humidity. Also, and I wonder if you've seen anything that talks about humidity as another element impacting the plant's caffeine or other content.
Great question. So the question is, shade seems to produce more caffeine. How about humidity? Does humidity play a role? And the answer is, I don't know. But I think because every time we look closer and closer, they do play a role. And so the real answer is, I don't know what that role is. And I haven't seen any research, but I'm sure people are looking at that. So this is one element that clouds the picture. And in the early years, we got all this barrage of information. Oh, black tea has more caffeine than any other type of tea. What about black tea or red tea in China? Who was doing much research on that? And oh, by the way, let me think about this again. How many varietals at a minimum did I tell you exist in China? 7,500. So you have to make a lot of experimentation. And that's why I said recently, last year, a preliminary study on many, many, many more varietals of Chinese tea was published. And in that, the scientists ascertained the following order by modality, but they footnoted it. They said to date, which means they're still working on this because this is a forever project. It's a huge project. But to date, they said white tea has more caffeine than any other tea. And again, to people, this is always a surprise. I was surprised because, again, this question this week caused me to go back and look at research, not look at the internet per se, because the internet, again, although it tells the truth all the time and gives us so many interesting theories, it's not research. And the interesting thing about this research was it said jasmine is number 2. I was blown away. I have no explanation for why that's the case, except jasmine is generally speaking green tea based. Oh, but there's a further surprise. The further surprise is that Chinese red tea / black tea and green tea are about the same, with the black tea being just elementarily larger. This is what this study was saying. And all the way at the end, the generally speaking, dark teas were the least caffeine. So all of these things, which turns everybody's head upside down. And it just makes us hard to get our arms around this question. So what is my advice? A, listen to yourself, first of all, because you are a caffeine register yourself. And how you feel will help inform you. What's the effect of caffeine on you? Second, listen to your doctor. If the doctor says, hey, it's proven this, proven that, proven whatever, go ahead and listen to the doctor. This is your doctor. You have a relationship with the doctor. Honor the relationship. Thirdly, I'll always give you the information I have. And I have no stake in this. I don't really care. I don't care at all because I don't sell caffeine. What I sell is fine tasting premium teas. And for me, I really don't care if red tea has more caffeine or less caffeine, or oolong has more or less. No stake in this at all. But I do have a stake in trying to give you the best information I can about the tea. Now, this intro was a little bit longer than I thought, but I wanted to give you some context because historically, you didn't have good research methodology. And so that ended up flooding the internet with certain assumptions. Currently, you have much better equipment. Methodology is much more current, and you get results now which are relevant to the market we're talking about, because we have Chinese teas here and we have loose leaf premium teas. So you're always going to get different numbers with those. And this is why when other people read the internet or read or hear about things, if they're not looking at all these elements, this is a problem. In China, they tend to agree with how we talk about the teas here. So, but that's not important either, is it? What's important are the real numbers. And that's what's starting to come out now. So that's a great thing. So let's focus on sparkle. For those of you who got up after 9:20 and didn't look at your internet, all of a sudden there's a map that popped up in your mailbox. And that map was something I sent you this morning about Nannuo, Nannuo. If you look on your map, you see a river going down the middle of it called the Lancang, Lancang. And that's in China what they call the Mekong River. And as you're looking at the map, on the left side, slightly, and let's see, left center, slightly south, there is the Nannuo mountains. Those mountains are about 40 miles from the Burmese border. So now that gives you a picture of where we are today. And I sent you pictures also of the tea trees from that area. So the tea that we're talking about today is old to ancient. So the trees in that area, and this mountain is very, very famous as a tea mountain. The tea from that area is anywhere from 900 to 1200 years old, the tea trees. And these are what you're having today is from those tea trees. So that's where we are today. And it's hideously difficult to find this place. Takes forever to get up there. You have to have four-wheel drive because some of the roads are barely accessible. But boy, oh boy, once you get up there, it is beautiful. And being in a tea forest is a very interesting and wonderful event. All right, so I've talked long enough right now. Now I'm going to ask the tea master, Biju, to come and demonstrate how to brew sparkle. And for those of you who are new to the broadcast, she'll demonstrate first. We'll talk a little bit about how to make judgments about the tea, and then you'll brew along with her. So it's the demonstration first. So let me bring up the numinous Biju.
Thank you. Yeah. Today I'm changed. So okay, we do Yunnan tea. So 红茶, so sparkle. 这样挑情况。That's business. So the process and also caffeine. So this tea, so hins right tea is 古树红茶。古树红茶 ，so 这样 say I cannot win the 古树红茶，对 ，so 这样 made the sparkle. Okay, we try sparkle tea. So yeah, so this is the 6 gram, 6 gram, and also so low temperature so with me together, low temperature 170, 170 degree and 3 minutes. Okay, we do kind of just.
So look at the tableau. 170-degree water is what you're going to use. 6 grams, it's already pre-measured, no need to measure it. And she, as I said, is going to demonstrate first. So you'll watch, you'll get a feel for the rhythm of doing this and learn the process of actually making a really fine cup of tea. Red tea.
And let me share some nice feedback for your sparkles from the participants. They like your sparkly top.
That's great.
Oh, yeah, right.
Sparkly top.
Yeah.
Not an accident.
So this is in
oh,
Yunnan.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry. This is in Yunnan, So also it's the same. I still use the Kung Fu style.
So for those of you who don't understand that reference, I know there are a few new people on today. What she means is that there's a traditional way of brewing tea in China by region, and it's called a Kung Fu style. And it kind of implies a mastery style. And usually you'll be brewing it in China in a smaller cup. But what Biju is saying is she's using the principles, those mastery principles to brew the tea. So the first thing you see her do is she heats the cup. Not only heats the cup, but making sure that there's no residue left on the cup of soap stains or any of that. So completely clean. You don't want anything to influence the final outcome, flavor outcome. Heating the cups so that when the leaves do go in the brewing cup, you wake them up, make sure that everything in the tableau is clean. You can use any temperature water when you're doing this process. You can use 212. Anything from 170 to 212 will work. So again, for the new participants, our water towers are set. One of the settings is 175. So one of the things we do is dissipate the steam. Whether you have a kettle which actually brews at 170 or gets the water to 170 or 175, doesn't matter. You're still going to go through the dissipation process. Why do you do that? You do that because you want the brightest flavor possible. When you dissipate the steam, you aerate the water, you get the brightest flavor possible. And brewing at 170 degrees is really the key. 170 or less, not 170 or more. 170 or less keeps that flavor bright.
When you brew the tea, so this is very important. Slowly, okay, gentle, slowly meditation. So
So tea rhythm.
tea rhythm, yeah. So yeah.
And you notice she transfers the water into this type of a kettle because in a minute you're going to see she has more control of where the water lands. Shakes the leaves to warm them up, also to make sure you're using the right tea. You're using what you think you're using. Now, do you have to pour from that elevation? No, you don't. And actually, for me, I have to pour from a lower elevation because I'm not as skilled as a tea master. So be careful of this process when you do this at home. You set your timer for 3 minutes. You heat the recipient cup. And here's when you start brewing what this should look like. The majority of leaves, these leaves are on top, few of them falling to the bottom. Beautiful, beautiful picture. So is this different in terms of processing than any other red tea? And the answer would be no. The basics are the same. You've got to pick it, right? You have to wither the leaves. So when you wither the leaves, what you do is you remove X amount of moisture from the tea leaves so that they become pliable. The withering is usually several hours. After you wither, then you actually crush the leaves. And it's not crushes so much as you roll them, trying to break down the cells in the leaves so that the aromatic volatiles and the volatiles in general come to the surface. You pile the leaves afterwards to allow oxidation to occur because, again, once you break down the cell walls in the leaves, they start to interact with the air, the oxygen in the air. And that interaction is caused by an enzyme within the tea. And just like when you open a banana, expose it to oxygen, it turns brown, taste is different. Same with the leaves. After X number of hours, it's usually somewhere between 4 and 12 hours of this oxidation. You stop that process, you unpile, and then you bake. There are other smaller steps that some farmers take. This tends to be less processed than red tea, say, from Anhui, because red tea from Anhui has about 5, 6, 7 more steps where they do some fine further processing and shaping of the leaves and so forth. This is less processed. Every area of red tea that's produced in China has its own culture. So the people in this area are not Han ethnicity. They are indigenous people's ethnicity. So they bring their own characteristics, and their own characteristics are different. So, for example, recently we had red tea from Ailao Mountain, and Ailao Mountain, they tend to oxidize somewhere between 80 and 82, 83%, which is low on the red tea scale. Here, they oxidize closer to 90%. Timer, by the way, went off. Tea master is going to separate the tea leaves from the tea liquid. You notice not in a hurry, just in rhythm more than anything. And save the leaves because you get 2 more steeps from that. And what do you have? You have this beautiful colored tea liquid. You aren't brewing yet, but when you do, it's going to look like this. So what do we do once we have this? We enter the quality arena. And what do I mean by that? We're going to make some judgments. First, about quality of astringency, where in the mouth it's occurring. We're going to make a judgment about aftertaste. And then most importantly, about energetics. What do I mean by energetic? You know, you have people sometimes call it cha-chi, you know, the chi of tea and so forth. You know what? I'm not smart enough to tell you what the chi of the tea is, but I'm real smart to tell you, hey, I feel a certain way after I drink it. Remember, there's 7 billion indicators. Each and every one of you is genomically set up to be an indicator for tea. How does the caffeine level feel? How do you feel overall when you drink this type of tea? Every tea from every region is going to give you a different feeling. Age of the tree or plant will create a different feeling for you. So there can be warming, cooling, calming, all sorts of things. Aftertaste can be cooling, minty. There can be all sorts of judgments. When you make this judgment, the first time around, you're going to be focusing on those factors. And you're going to take a 170-degree sip, which is a bigger sip than if this were a 200-degree tea. If this were a 200-degree tea, you'd only take an inhalation. Here, you're going to take a sip and roll it around in your mouth. And as you do that, you're going to be thinking about, where's it drying in my mouth? Where's it a little stringent in my mouth? Okay, I've made a judgment about that. How am I feeling in terms of aftertaste? I've already registered something about that. It takes a little longer sometimes for the energy level or how you're feeling after you drink it to hit you. Some people it's right away, sometimes it's not right away. Don't worry. And don't worry if where it hits you in the mouth is differently than where it hits me in the mouth. We're all genetically different. I'm going to take a second sip. And on the second sip, we're going to explore aroma. We're going to explore taste. And we're going to confirm what we think we detected in the first sip. We're not in a hurry when we do this. This is tea rhythm. We're going to think about, we're going to take notes on what we're feeling, because remember, this is the first in a set of 3 more reds. And each of these reds is from a different location. The feeling, the taste, it's all going to be different. And by taking notes, you have a way to compare. And remember, the great thing about Sophie's is it gives you lots of choices. We have well over 100 different reds here from all over China. And the number one thing you can take away is an understanding of the possibility of scope. And that's what this is partially teaching you about. All right, it's your turn to brew. And the tea master is going to go ahead and brew with you. So if you only have 2 cups, doesn't matter. We do 3 cups because we can dissipate the heat faster or the steam faster. We can aerate the water faster. But if 2 cups is what you have, that's fine. And you notice, hey, where are the cup covers? Oh no, When you brew this type of tea, you do not cover. You brew it uncovered. If you cover it, the result will be a flattening of this taste.
这是清洁的。
So tea masters demonstrating tea rhythm. And there's just this really steadiness about doing it. Not rushed, not jerky. It's just in the rhythm of understanding how to achieve the results. And by the way, that's what Kung Fu tea is. It's the mastery of the rhythm. Is that rhythm external or internal? It's both. When you are performing this rhythm, you internally have to be present. If you're not present, you're not going to be able to do this at maximal level. It's external because there's certain things you must do. And one of them is to aerate the water, dissipate the steam. You must do that to get maximum flavor. Now, if you're in a hurry, do you have to do that? No, you'll get a different flavor. But if you're really trying to get the best flavor, then going through these steps will help you achieve that. So you've dissipated the steam, aerated the water, you've got your bag number 1 called sparkle, you've taken the leaves, you're ready to put them in one of these heated cups. And you notice, are you in a hurry? The answer is no, because if you make this tea at 169 or 168 or 165, it is not going to matter. It is going to matter if you make it at 180. It's just not going to taste the same. And if you don't have a pot like this, don't worry, just pour directly into the cup. The attempt is to not pour directly on the leaves. You're trying to pour on the side of the cup and kind of get the water to come up from underneath. You set your timer for 3 minutes. And you're off to the races. So in this village is very famous in China as a very famous tea village. And the reason it's famous, and you notice on that map I provided, there's a bunch of names, and those are all mountaintop names. And those are all where famous tea grows. And many of those places have old ancient growth. So I ask you this, you saw the pictures I sent, and you see a person kind of peeking up through the tea trees, and you see that these trees are real trees. This is different than plantation field, isn't it? And one of the big differences is, I mean, do you think it would be easy for you to go and pick tea from this? I mean, let's say you're in great shape and you can go down there. I can climb trees. You can climb trees. What about this? As you're climbing up the trees, you see these gigantic spiders. Oh, that's not so friendly. Now that's one little obstacle. How about wasps, which are as large? In this area, we saw wasps as large as I've ever seen them. You hear them, by the way, before you see them. Does that sound like fun? How about other insects that just are buzzing around? So what I'm trying to tell you is in this area, and it's closer to subtropical, so everything is bigger. But these people are used to going up here. The farmers who live here, and they know what to avoid. They know when and where to look for snakes. All the things which you and I, if we were to do this, we might be terrified. Yes.
These leaves seem to really like to float at the top. Is there a reason?
So the questioner asked, why do these leaves, in comparison to some others, why do so many of them float at the top? Answer is, I don't really know. I know which teas that occurs, but I've never really studied the physics of what makes that the case. And what's interesting is that's part of how you can tell. It's interesting. I use this as a tool, but I don't have the answer to why it's so effective. The tool I use it for is to determine whether a type of tea is really as advertised. Your timer's gone off. You're going to separate, not in a hurry, but with rhythm, being present, the tea leaves from the tea liquid.
Another participant comments, the warm leaves have a sweet malt scent, but there is a hint of something very smooth and complex in the background. At first, I thought it was maybe as like cherry, but then I seem to smell chocolate in the dry leaves.
So a long and interesting comment. So this comment is about aroma and taste, and it's talking about sweet and malty as an opening opening part of a symphony. And as it develops, the aroma has suggestions of maybe a little chocolate, maybe a little cherry. So really what this commentary, and by the way, I'm with you. I'm all in. This great comment. What this commentator is noting is that this is an interesting red tea because it's presenting so many faces. You know, some of the red teas that we've tasted recently have presented a face right away. Strong sweetness, strong fruitiness. This is not. This is presenting a bunch of faces, and this is one of the reasons we love going to this place, because this place's tea, non-Norwell Mountains tea, particularly from this area of the non-Norwell Mountains, has tea that the flavor isn't as directly identifiable as some of the other places. Yes.
Somebody else also caught a smell of chocolate in the dry leaves, and another person says she got some kind of sweet dried fruit aroma from the warm leaves.
Chocolate in the dry leaves, and another commentator notes a dried fruit of some sort in the wet leaves. And love how you all are commenting. I'll tell you why I love how you're commenting, because you're talking about the hints. You're not trying to assign much of a label, because it's really hard. Why is it hard again? We're not a tea culture. We're, in our sessions, becoming a great tea culture. But in general, Americans don't belong to a tea culture. They belong kind of to the Lipton's culture, and that's not much of anything. This is giving you a much broader scope, and it's giving you a way to start to understand how to talk about premium tea. Yes.
Another participant says the dry leaves had a really forward, sweet, and fruity aroma, and then the wet leaves let me know that this will be a juicy tea with a delicious sweetness. Last, the tea liquor did not disappoint. Honey, mouth-watering smoothness.
Okay, so we have dried leaves, wet leaves, and then the actual tea itself. So the dried leaves were sold with sweet and fruity.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet and fruity. The wet leaves,
juicy with a delicious sweetness.
Juicy with a delicious sweetness. I want to stop right there before I get to the tea liquid itself. I love this comment right here, because you detect juiciness, and in the same breath as I detected it, because I picked it up real quickly. Oh my gosh, this is going to be juicy, it's gonna be mellow. So we've got sweet in the dry, juicy in the wet leaves. Tea liquor again? Fruity?
Honey,
Honey.
mouth-watering smoothness.
Honey, mouth-watering smoothness. This is a whole package. That is the whole symphony right there. That juicy in the wet translates to mouth-watering honey. And I love the fact that you use honey because honey covers a lot of sweet flavors. Yes.
Another participant also comments, yes, very juicy and smooth for her. And then someone else notes the initial sips leave me with a tingly sensation on the top of my tongue. Is this why you named it Sparkle?
Great comment. Tingly sensation on the top of the tongue. Is that why we named it Sparkle? In a way it is. It was more than just the tingly sensation. It was the fact that you had so many different flavors occurring at the same time, almost like they were sparkling through the tea liquor. That was the thought pattern, but I love the sense of that tingliness in the mouth. And by the way, some of you may get it in a different part of the tongue. This doesn't mean that you aren't catching it right, not at all, or that your tongue is defective. None of that. We're all genetically different, so it's going to appear stronger, lighter, and in different places of the tongue. So don't worry. Yes.
Another participant says she agrees with all these comments. This might be her favorite red tea ever. And another participant says, how would you compare this to one of her other favorites, Honey Merlot?
Great question. So there's a great question and a great comment. Let's talk about the great comment first. This particular participant, one of her favorite teas, red teas ever. And I can't disagree with that. I mean, we love this tea. And then the next commentator asked the question of how we would compare this to Honey Merlot. Honey Merlot was one of the early old/ancient tree teas that we have. And that came from Anhui province. So the flavor of Honey Merlot had more distinct edges to it. This has, from our perspective, more rounded edges. And as such, they are different. Honey Merlot doesn't let you forget about it. I mean, it grabbed you right away and kind of held your hand and said, I'm never going to leave you. Sparkle, on the other hand, is kind of enticing you in. So from my perspective, that's how I compare the two. And both are great. I loved Honey Merlot, and I was really sorry when we weren't able to get more of that. Yes. Okay. So you all are getting this, and this is one of our favorites also. And one of the things, old to ancient, which is important to understand, is there's always going to be, as you get into this area, a calmingness that comes with this type of tea as well. And I certainly, as part of the energy, get a warmth and a calmness from this tea. So you may or may not get that, but I wanted to share that before we finish the session. So this is a Yunnan tea. It's closer to the border, and as such, when we've done Fengqing reds, Yunnan teas, they tend to be sweeter. These tend to have more flavors occurring throughout them. So that's one of the differences we would note between this and, say, a Fengqing. Between this and the Honey Merlot, just as I mentioned, the Anhui reds tend to have a more grabbing your attention style. And these tend to kind of sneak up on you. What is it about the teas from this area? Aside from the fact that Nano Mountains has been famous for a long time for producing tea, and these tea trees are very old, this has been an area where lots of different indigenous peoples have passed through over the last 1,000 years. So you've had many traditions mixed in this area, and the current set of people have made this type of decision in terms of how to process it. Every indigenous people has a little bit different way, and sometimes quite a distinctive way of processing, and that influences final results. Now, let me kind of wrap this up, because there's one element that I didn't discuss about caffeine, and I should have. And I wanted to wait till the end to discuss this. And that is how you brewing the tea. When you do what the milk and sugar places do, which is to use 205 degrees temperature, brew it for X amount of time, who knows what that time is, but longer will produce more caffeine in your output. Lower temp will produce an equivalent time, will produce less caffeine. So it's not only the caffeine within the plant itself, it's also what you extract from it.
Participant asked, will Sparkle be available for purchase on the website, or should they call?
They should call. So Sparkle is not on the website. So go ahead and give me a call. Happy to execute the transaction at that time. Good. This, as I said, is the start of 3 reds. So Sparkle this week, next week, Arcadian, and then the week following, Ancient Mystery. Wow. We're off to the races again with the reds. And again, we've chosen this last 4 weeks to go through the reds like this, to expand your overall knowledge of how to appreciate the reds. And we've chosen some really high-end teas for you. You never disappoint. And the reason you just don't disappoint is because you've developed this great vocabulary. You've developed a great way to communicate about the teas. So I salute all of you for the progress that week after week you've made, and for just your generalized level of knowledge. I mean, if I were to go into a judging competition, you know who I'd want beside me as the judges? I'd want all of you, because all of you bring up elements that are important to understand when making judgments about this team. Now, I leave you with responsibilities for this week. And the main responsibility is to stay healthy. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you next week. Have a great week. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.